For this portion of the summit, we're going to talk about restorative justice and the criminal justice system. And to do that, we've got a distinguished panel here, Mr. Patrick John, Pat Nolan, and Craig DeRoche. And we'll have each of these gentlemen introduce themselves, give you their background, and what I would even call their testimony to give credibility to this discussion. And I think if there's time, once they're done, we will open up to questions from the audience, correct? Okay.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Not with the technology. No? Better? Okay, I can't. All right, thank you. My name is Patrick John. I'm an attorney in private practice in Chicago. I've been practicing about 15 years. We're here to talk about restorative justice. Now, in my practice, I do very little criminal, especially now, mostly civil work. I've lived in the community most of my life, except for a brief period when I lived in Naperville. Anybody know where Naperville is? And so one of the things that we know, unfortunately, is the unfortunate statistics of the high rates of incarceration, the disproportionate rates even of incarceration of young black and brown men. And we don't need to recite what the stats are, but going to jail ain't good. It gives you a record, makes it hard for you to get employment. It leads to increased, believe it or not, I've seen studies where they talk about the HIV rates in the black community can be attributed in large part to the high rates of incarceration of black men. But does it have to be that way? Is that the best way for us to curb crime and protect the community? Well, we've got two people here that are going to tell you, no, there's a better way. It's not always the best way to lock them away and throw away the key and bury them under the jail. Sometimes there's a better way. And these two gentlemen are going to talk about that today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
I'll give it a shot up there. Thank you so much, Mr. Johns. My name is Pat Nolan, and I'm the Chuck Colson Scholar on Justice at Prison Fellowship Ministries. I bring a unique background to Prison Fellowship. I was a member of the legislature in California for 15 years. I was a Republican leader of the Assembly. I was a good friend of Jack Kemp and carried enterprise zone legislation to try to restore the economic vibrancy of our inner cities. I'm a conservative Republican, was involved in all of Reagan's campaigns from when he first ran for governor and people said he had no chance in the Republican primary on through his final victory in '84. As a member of the legislature, I was very strong against crime. I was a law and order conservative. I'd grown up on Crenshaw Boulevard in Los Angeles at Washington and Crenshaw, which was a very tough neighborhood. Every member of my family was a victim of crime, as was I. Our neighbor, Buck Baker, was shotgunned coming out of 6:30 Mass at our church. There were numerous crimes that caused the whole neighborhood to live in fear. When I got elected to the legislature, I thought that the way to solve that was to lock people up. And in fact, there are some people we should be afraid of, so much so that they should be locked up. But we also lock up a lot of other people that we really aren't afraid of, we're really just mad at. And there are better uses for prisons than locking up folks we're just mad at. My heart changed when I was convicted of a crime myself. I was convicted of accepting a campaign contribution allegedly tied to legislation, and I served 33 months in federal prison. And I saw the impact that the laws that I had advocated were having on the young men with whom I served in prison. I saw the lack of hope in their lives. I saw the lack of any program to try to prepare them to live better lives. I saw how difficult it was to practice faith in prison or to accept Jesus in prison. The myth on TV is that everybody's a jailhouse Christian. Actually, it's very hard to be a Christian in prison. The system makes it. It's hard because it's more work. It's more work to let volunteers in. It's more work to keep track of Bibles that come in. And frankly, like most government bureaucracies, a lot of the people that work there aren't interested in more work. But the public is. The public needs that safety. They need these inmates prepared. And while I was inside, a young lady wrote to me. She'd worked for a Democrat member of the legislature. And she said, I know you're a Christian. I know you're interested in justice issues. And she sent me a pamphlet from Justice Fellowship that gave the vision of restorative justice. And it was like the scales were taken from my eyes. This was the truth. And to try to put it in a nutshell, restorative justice looks at crime as victim harming rather than law breaking. Yes, a law is broken, but more importantly, someone's been harmed by that crime. And at its root, crime is a moral problem, not a legal problem. Think of it, the first crime in the Bible, when Cain killed Abel, there was no statute against murder, but still was wrong, and every one of us knows it's wrong. It's imprinted on our soul. That's the way God created us. And what does it say in Genesis? Satan says to Cain, sin is crouching outside your door. It seeks to control you, and you must master it. That's the struggle. Satan wants to control our lives, and we have to fight against that. And on our own, frankly, we're powerless. We need God's help to do that. We need an understanding of how God wants the community to live so that we can live according to that. We need to know that God is our creator, created in his image out of love, but also with certain structures he wants us to follow. So many kids grow up today without any knowledge of that. To them, life is all about, what can I have? What can I take? You know, the sayings, if it feels good, do it. Just make your own road. There are no rules. Well, you know, they get in trouble and they realize there are rules. And it was really unfair for society to tell them there were no rules, because we do have rules. But when they break them, rather than saying, now we need to tell you the rules and help you live a better life, instead they're kicked and hit and thrown in to prison, where they stew with other criminals. The skills you learn to survive in prison make you more dangerous when you get out, if you're a nonviolent, low-risk person. We should instead be working with them to straighten out their life, but also to understand the rules. There aren't enough cops in the world to stop somebody from doing something wrong. We have to have self-control. And that's, after all, essentially what our faith is. We cede control to God. We give our lives to God. Otherwise, it's all about us. And frankly, most of the kids inside there got in trouble because it was all about them. Now, when I say crime is victim harming, we've pushed the victims out of the picture altogether. They are at most props for the government, for the case against the offender. But nothing's done to heal the relationship between the victim and the offender, between the offender and the community. And that's what is the sin. Those broken relationships. When Cain killed Abel, he committed a sin. He broke God's heart that he would take the life of someone God had created in his image too. That's what was the sin. He broke that relationship that God wanted. And God held him accountable. We have to hold people accountable too. And one of the ways we do that is through restitution. We ask the offender to pay back some of what they've done in harm to the victim. But if they're sent to prison and they're earning 17 cents an hour mopping floors, how on earth are they going to pay the victim back? If they're not a physical threat to the community, they shouldn't be in prison. They should be in the community under supervision, having a job and paying to support their family and pay restitution to the victim. That's going to help the victim far more than having him locked up. Now again, if the person is a violent offender, yes, they need to be separated from society. But a lot of the folks we lock up aren't that violent. We don't live in fear of them. We do want them to stop what they're doing that's wrong, however. And that's where Christian ministries come into it in prison. We come inside and say, you were created in God's image with love. And if you accept Christ as your Savior, He already paid for your sins. All that you've done has already been paid for. But you have to turn your life over. You have to surrender to Him. And He'll order your steps for you. Now that's a tough road, because inside prison, you're supposed to be a tough, mean guy. And frankly, the Christian view is humility and self-sacrifice. But people do it, and the change, the transformation is miraculous. Really, it's a work of God to see the change that God can make inside people. Now, when they get out, the temptations are right back. One of the inmates that went through our program said, giving up drugs was the easy part. Giving up my friends was the tough part. And it is. That's why we strongly recommend mentors. Godly people from the local community that will come alongside an offender. And as they take those first steps into freedom, we'll help them make good choices. We'll walk through the processes for them. Help think through what to do and hold them accountable. If they're doing something wrong, pull them up short. But if they're doing something right, complimenting them. We also want them to be involved in church. John DiIulio, a famous sociologist, said, the last two institutions to leave the inner city are liquor stores and the church. A lot of truth there. The dividing line between good and evil can really be seen in those two institutions. Around liquor stores are clusters of violence, gambling, prostitution, drugs. And around churches, there's healthy activities, community activities, relationships built and strengthened. But it's important that we reach out to them in love, not shaking our fingers at them, but instead saying, Christ died for our sins too, and we welcome you to us. We're going to hold you accountable, but we want you to succeed. Dr. King said, to change someone, you must first love them. And they must know that you love them. And that's the spirit in which our mentors work with the men and women that come out. At our table there, we have many books. This is a book I wrote. It's very simple. It's not profound. But it's When Prisoners Return, how you and your church can help. And it's practical steps you and your congregation can do to help these men and women as they come out. Let me just tell you a quick story that happened to me so you understand the difficulty inmates face. My first day out, I was at the halfway house. A bunch of my friends from the Capitol came, and 11 of us had lunch. The waiter came over, and they all ordered. And I sat there trying to decide what to order from the menu. And you know, a deli menu, there are 100 items on it. And my eyes flitted over everything. They were darting back and forth, and I just couldn't decide. And my cheeks got red. They were all sitting there in embarrassed silence. The waiter was impatient, tapping his pad, and finally I just blurted out the next thing my eyes set on because it was so frustrating not to be able to order. So he went away. And, you know, I hadn't ordered anything to eat for over 2 years. And literally the ability to choose had slipped away from me in just 2 years. Now think, I came from a good family. I had a great education. I had periods of responsibility. And yet I couldn't even order from a menu. Then think about the kid that ran away from home, probably an abusive home, drugs there, got into drugs himself, got into trouble stealing to support his habit. And he ends up in prison for a few years. And he comes out, it's not about what he's going to order from a deli menu. It's where's he going to lay his head that night where he can be safe. Where does he eat in the morning? How does he pay for it? Where does he go to look for work? How does he get a driver's license or ID? All those myriad of things. And he's got no help. That's where the mentor comes in, to walk with him. Here, I'll go get your birth certificate and we'll go down to the DMV together. Yes, here, I can help you file for a job. And here, we'll go to the Salvation Army to get some nice clothes. And here's how you deal with your conviction and explain to the employer why what you did was wrong, but how you've turned your life around. You don't lie about it. You tell the truth. You're accountable. Things like that. When the person gets a job and they get in a beef with a supervisor or another employee, they come up to it and say, now that's not the way you handle it. We don't want you to handle it like you did on the street or inside. Here's how you work it through. The employers like it because they have somebody they can go to help with that. It's good all around, and it's the loving church reaching out in help. One day, Richard Viguerie, who some of you know, a great conservative leader, asked me, well, okay, what would America look like in 5 years if we applied restorative justice? And I worked on it. I wrote out a statement about, how families could live in neighborhoods and kids could walk to the market without getting beaten up, and elderly could walk and pick up the paper without fear. People could go to church without fear. And the next day in my reading in the Bible came upon Isaiah 32:18. And there it was. God had already written the vision statement long before me. He said, my people will live in peaceful communities, in secure homes, and in tranquil places of rest. Think of that beautiful vision. Peace, security, tranquility. That's what God wants our communities to be. And working through you and your churches, we can restore our communities to that. And God will smile. Thank you.
It is always tough to follow my mentor and friend. Pat Nolan is kind of a legend in the restorative justice circle. Since he left prison, he served for 16 years as the president of Justice Fellowship, when Chuck Colson hired him straight out of there to provide a lot of leadership around the country, and now continuing to serve as the Colson Fellow on Justice all throughout America. I am Craig DeRoche. I am the new president of Justice Fellowship. I followed a somewhat similar path as Pat Nolan in politics. I was in the legislature in Michigan, where I served as the Speaker of the House, getting to be a while ago, about 10 years ago, under Jennifer Granholm, if you guys have ever heard that name. I used to fight with her. I used to say, like, brother and sister. It was more like Tom and Jerry, though, if you saw the words and the tricks that we'd play on each other. And I'm pretty well known as a strong conservative voice. And a lot of people, when I started working at Justice Fellowship, asked me, how did you go from working in conservative politics to working in criminal justice reform? And I said, well, the same way as Chuck Colson. I got arrested. And it's the truth. And but for as much care and compassion as Chuck Colson had for the prisoner, he never bothered to go out and get addicted to anything. And so God brought an alcoholic to the ministry, because that was my problem. And it wasn't a problem that I acquired after I left office. It was something I carried with me since I was a little kid. 29 years in active addiction. And I started speaking about it when I had destroyed my entire life through addiction, the realities of addiction, what it was. And it's different from something that you can scare someone straight on, or you can educate them on, or provide them with a degree. Heck, I graduated college when I was 20 years old. Top of my class, outstanding student leader. I was Speaker of the House when I was 34, could balance a $43 billion budget, but I couldn't figure out how to go to sleep without drinking myself till I passed out. And I had to lose everything. And I had to be lifted up by a power greater than myself before I could take any step forward, whether it be in marriage or in business or productivity at any level. And I really felt that God put on my heart that life experience that I had in politics as well as in addiction could be used to help other people. And that's where I started speaking out, and where Pat Nolan, on a speech that I gave along with him in 2011, introduced me to come down to meet Chuck Colson and get involved in this important work. And I think that the black conservative movement, which this is such an honor to be up here and talk to you all. Some people have made comments about the future and the growth that we're going to see in the attendance at events like this. But I think a lot of that is going to come if you continue to talk about what is wrong with the criminal justice system in America and connect with the black community. It's not always about promotion. It has to be about attraction and what is real and what's right in front of people. I've been pro-life my whole life, right? I've had different values on marriage. I was raised by a mother and a father. I understand these things. But the reality of what's going on, I'm from Detroit. My state representative district bordered a street called 8 Mile. Have you guys ever heard of 8 Mile in Detroit? Okay? I know about race politics, right? Black people live south of 8 Mile, white people live north of 8 Mile, right? That's changed. That was true when I was growing up 40 years ago. Today, my daughter, where I live, just 3-4 miles north of 8 Mile, in her elementary school, there are 23 different first languages spoken, 23 different first languages spoken out of 45 kids. I can't even count all of the countries. They have all the flags up, though. It's really beautiful. So it's not just the integration or the moving past of the race and the problems that we had in Detroit, but it's true diversity and what America makes us great. But what we have in a hollowed out city in the criminal justice system is everything that is wrong with liberalism, everything that has been misguided about what conservatives have said the answer can be. And I think that if we take the time to review our principles of original intent of what our Constitution is and the proper role of government and what we expect when a crime is committed, the accountability and the restoration between the victim and the community and, yes, that offender, because that is part of their growth. And we understand, does anybody here like it when people talk about a class of people as those people? You know, that kind of turns people off, doesn't it? But we get a lot of that in America, and I think people have become sensitive to it when they're talking to a group and they say, well, about those people, if they're talking about black people or Mexican people, they understand in their head that that's offensive. But isn't it funny how much Americans, we still like to have those people out there, right? And how perfectly comfortable we are when we're talking about those people, those criminals. You know, those people that do those drugs and those people, you know, they need to be taught this and they need, one of the privileges of working for Prison Fellowship was Chuck Colson was one of those people. Pat Nolan was one of those people. I'm one of those people. I'm a convicted criminal as well. And so we don't have to talk about those people. We can talk about who we are. And to be honest with you, when you see these statistics, and Patrick said, I'm going to give you some statistics because I think they're important, but I'm not going to give you too many. They're important for us to realize that it isn't about those people. We're talking about ourselves. There are 300 to 400,000 federal code laws that you can break that have been criminalized. There are 4,500 federal crimes. There are usually about 5,000 in every state. People go to jail every day for collecting rainwater, putting up aluminum siding without a permit, a lemonade stand for their kids. I could keep on going on and on down the list. And every day people talk about those people, especially when it comes to drugs. Never mind that in America there were 163 million prescriptions for Vicodin written last year, perfectly legal. It's those people in the city of Detroit, those kids need to be taught a lesson, or in New York City. Meanwhile, the government that we let off the hook from the real job in Detroit, we are the murder capital of the world. It's nothing to be proud of. They'll go on the TV and they'll say that's what the money goes to, that's why they have the police running around. But 50% of the murders go unsolved. In Chicago, 30% of the murders go unsolved. For a young black man, it is more likely that you will get away with murder in Chicago than you will find a job. And we need to work together as conservatives and bridge that gap between white America and black America on our principles where they went wrong. Because, my friends, I believe that it's connected. The first thing our government decided to do was to run a criminal justice system. We did not agree on having a standing army for 3 or 4 presidents. So it wasn't even national defense. It was a criminal justice system. That's the role and the domain of the government. We want to pay our taxes for you to do this for us. And as Pat Nolan said, as soon as the government got involved, they started systematically removing the purpose of it, which was the victim. And the victim becomes the government. And the government starts marching forward to encroach on people's rights. And too many conservatives have gone all the way till 2013 before they wake up shocked that the NSA would dare to look at their emails, or that the IRS would ask them these questions and everything. They have no idea what goes on in these black communities. where people are stopped and frisked, and 47,000 people are made to be criminals in New York City alone in 1 year in 2011 for no other reason than they had a joint in their pocket. My joke on that, I'm a conservative. I'm not for the legalization of drugs. I take them very seriously. I'm in recovery myself. I lost a younger brother to an overdose. I do not want them legalized, but why didn't you stop and ask the women to look inside their purses and see if they were real Gucci purses? Because that's felony theft. And you could have found 80,000 of them walking down as felons. We need to stand forward and start talking common sense to the power and start saying that I'm a conservative and it is right that someone should get a defense. That is a check and a balance against prosecutors. That is a conservative principle. It's what the founders of this country stood for. What is the end when somebody when somebody's convicted of a crime? When does that end? What do they have to do? Because I want them as a conservative to be self-sufficient. I don't want them never to vote again. I don't want them never to be able to hold the job again. I don't want them to never be responsible for their own kids. Let's demand an end. Let's start working together as conservatives to restore rights. And let's expect that we can make those changes, because I think that these are uniting forces, and I think that if as conservatives we build the rhetoric and advance the policies together, that we can make a real difference in attracting more black Americans, black conservatives to this cause. And I hope that Justice Fellowship will be a part of it. My shameless plug, and I'll stop my preaching up here, is that justicefellowship.org is advancing a network. Justice Fellowship has traditionally worked as a grasstops organization that is a proud heritage. People, presidents, and governors and the United States senators call this man, Pat Nolan, Chuck Colson, myself, others. That's been an honor, but we're not going to make the changes that we want unless you all start adding your voice to the mix on criminal justice reform. So thank you, and I know we have more time in the panel. I hope I left some.
Great job.
I don't know, how much more time do we have, by the way? Just, oh, do we? Okay.
We don't even have to use all of that because it is coming a little late. And
Okay.
we have one more panel.
Okay, I know that our panelists were open to some questions, so I wanted to give them a couple of Q&A. I wanted to make this remark, and just to follow what Craig said, one of the amazing things, well, everybody who's a black conservative knows the challenge of being a black conservative. You know, it's almost like, anybody ever seen that skit with Dave Chappelle when he played the part of a blind Ku Klux Klansman? Do you remember that one? Okay, so he was blind, and if you didn't see it, let me tell you, go on Netflix or YouTube or something. So he's blind, and he's adopted by a white family, and they're going to a Klan rally, and his brothers are like, we're going to the Klan rally, and he's blind, and he's like, I want to go to the Klan rally too. And he says, well, we're protesting the Negroes. I want to protest the Negroes too. But that's how they treat us. But I wanted to say something to you as I was. I didn't say much about about my history, but I'm from Guyana, South America, place with Jim Jones. Came to New York City, grew up in Brooklyn, and when I did my undergrad, I did it in Harlem. If you think it's rough to be a black conservative on the south side of Chicago, being a black conservative in Harlem is no cakewalk. And one of the things I did, my pre-law major, and was a black studies minor. And one of the things that amazed me is I learned about African history prior to slavery. One of the things is that slavery started in the 1400s, what we call slavery, chattel slavery. Prior to that, Europeans had visited Africa, not to conquer, not to enslave, simply as travelers and visitors. And they came, and when they returned to Europe, they told of the great stories of what they'd seen in Africa. And one of the things that's amazing is that they reported no crime and no prisons. But yet, there was a fair amount of wealth. Women walking around, adorned in gold. And when I took a little bit of research to talk to you today about restorative justice, I learned something about the history of restorative justice. And that is that until about the year 1100, most places in the world, Africa, Asia, Europe, did what we call now restorative justice. Meaning the role of government was seen as not a crime against the state. Now if you, for instance, if you did shoplifting, it's the people of the state of Illinois versus you. But up until about 1100, it was you versus Walgreens. And that was it. The government stayed out of it only to the extent to regulate, almost like a breach of contract, to regulate that you need to repay Walgreens. So it's interesting. I just want to, what Craig had said, that we as conservatives have kind of lost our way in this regard. And this is actually that we kind of didn't realize, I'm sure we realize now, that by letting the government come in and getting their nose in the tent, once you let the camel get his nose in the tent, then he's all over the tent. Now, our panelists have graciously agreed to take questions. So if there are any questions that the audience has, we can take them. If not, there are one or two that I would give. Any questions from the audience? Questions going once? I can. Oh, okay, yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good evening. I'm Kevin McClain. I have a question regarding the reforms that you're referring to in terms of restorative justice. Are they limited to merely minor drug offenses, or are you looking at just the non-felonious crimes?
Can I? Sure. It applies to all crimes. In fact, in the most difficult cases, murder and child abuse, restorative justice is the most powerful. And the reason is no amount of money can settle those things. But what victims want more than anything else is for all the lies and excuses to stop and have the person say, I did it, to take responsibility and then to say, I'm sorry. And we encourage victim-offender dialogue. If the victim is willing, it's the victim's choice, if they want to, or they can give the cry of their heart to say, this is how you've harmed me. These are the sleepless nights I have. I can't have relations with my husband anymore. They can go through all the things like that. That, to the offender, is more difficult than sitting in court hearing all that stuff, because it's real. That harm is real. They hear it. And it often prompts an apology. The victim doesn't have to accept it, but if it does, that opens the chance for reparation. Let me just tell you a quick story that came in a program we have. Arna Washington was an elderly black woman, a teacher, beautiful, erect, I mean, the epitome of the wonderful teachers I had and learned from. Her daughter was murdered, and she had opposed his parole for years. She went to her pastor and said, I got a letter from the state, and I've fought this guy's parole, but I'm not sure that's what Jesus wants me to do. I know you go out to the prison and counsel the prisoners. Is this guy Ron Flowers there? Well, it turns out he was. He was in our Interchange Freedom Initiative program. The chances of that are very slim, but he was. And so her pastor talked to Ron. We have a program that has other victims come and tell about their problems, and then we want them to write a letter to their victim of apology if the victim is willing to accept it. He wrote a letter, and Mrs. Washington rejected it and said, this is insincere. You're just mouthing words. You don't mean this. Well, that crushed Ron. He then sat down and poured his heart out, apologizing. And she said, this is the genuine article. I'd like to meet with him. We facilitated their meeting. And she went there. She says that. I didn't go to forgive him. I went there to tell him how he ruined my life. And she did. Her husband, another school teacher, died a year later of a broken heart. He never taught another day after their daughter was killed. Her son got into drugs and died of AIDS, and now she was all alone. And she told Ron this, you've destroyed my family and my life. And he said, I know what I've done is so awful. Nothing I can do can make it up, but I'm really sorry. Is there anything I can do? And she said, yes. You can send me a Mother's Day card because I don't have anyone to send one to me. And then they talked about it. She had always wondered what happened. Well, her daughter's date had gone to buy drugs from Ron. The guy tried to hold Ron up. He wanted not only the drugs, but Ron's money. Ron ran, saw this shape in the car, which he thought was an ambush. He shot as he ran by. It wasn't until he got home and watched on TV, he saw that a young lady had died, that he had murdered her. That helped Mrs. Washington, because she always wondered, was my daughter involved in drugs? What was she doing in that part of time? She wasn't. It was her date. Ron was able to free her of that fear, but also he began to send her Mother's Day card. I was blessed, as was Chuck Coulson, to be there when Ron graduated from our program, and totally unprompted, as Ron's name was called and he walked across the stage, Mrs. Washington rose from the audience and walked up and across the stage and embraced him and walked off the stage arm in arm with him. She invited him to church with her every week and home to supper every Sunday for the rest of her life. Now that's true love. I'm not sure I could do that, but Jesus made that possible. And so for even the toughest crimes, restorative justice can work.
Questions?
We have time for one more.
Question?
One more question.
Question? If not, I have a question. If no one else has a question,
I have one, Dan.
Okay.
I've heard, and I want to get your opinion, that one of the reasons why AIDS has had a devastating, how do I put this? That a lot of men are turned out in prison.
Yes.
Is that so?
I was on the Prison Rape Elimination Commission. A horrible scandal in our country is that rapes take place in prison. About 10% of prisoners are sexually assaulted each year. 10%. And yes, turned out is a polite word. There's a weird prison culture. Understand, Satan stalks the halls of prisons. He owns the prison. Any Christian influence is a ray of light, but it's small compared to Satan runs the place. And under their rules, if a man is raped by another man, he's, quote, turned out, which means he's fair game from then on, and he's turned into a sexual slave. It's one of the reasons suicides are so high in prison, because it's ignored by many prison officials, and they become infected with AIDS. Another thing is, for the rapists, there's the weird thought that it's not homosexual because they have no alternative in prison. They still consider them straight, but they take it out on other prisoners by raping them. It is a weird, perverse culture. And finally, jointly, bipartisan-wise, this is one thing we talked about, our issues have left and right, Republican and Democrat coming together on. Jointly, bipartisan, we passed the National Prison Rape Elimination Act, which said we're going to make this a priority. It's a crime, and we're going to eliminate it from within prisons. But what you've said is absolutely right. They come home, and then they make love to their wives, and they're carrying this awful disease. And that's, I wish I could tell you something different, but that's the reality.
I also say that...
And the reality, just to follow up on that, to help everybody out here, because this is we're talking a lot about paradigm shifts here, and I think that when you start from the humane angle, it's hard to get people's attention, because when you're mad at somebody, you're really mad at them, right? People do some really, if you read my police reports, really stupid things, okay? And you say they deserve it. That's what the public would say. But the point is that people are supposed to come back safer. This is the corrections department, not the advanced degree in criminology, criminal behavior department. And we allow that, we tolerate this from our government. Where do the drugs and the alcohol come from that are in every prison? Where do people go for petty crimes to get destroyed through sexual abuse? These people come back and they make our communities less safe. The government is participating in making our community less safe. And that is, again, where we can raise it's one of these things that we're blind to as conservatives, right? We say if you give this to Medicaid, they're going to screw it up. It's going to be full of fraud and theft and scams and this and that. The post office, boy, the food stamps, you know what that's going to do? It's going to undermine this and that. Oh, that guy's got a badge on. He wouldn't be involved in any of that. We've had hundreds of thousands of people. You take a population of any hundreds of thousands of people that have the control and the authority of the government, and it will be run approximately at the level of the other government departments that employ hundreds of thousands of people. And we've got to wake up to that. And we've got to recognize that our interests are not being served unless we advance our voice to say we want people when they go there to come back better than when they went in. And that's a reasonable expectation if the government wants to take on the responsibility of incarcerating a human being.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Why don't we give them a hand?